Apriorian Apologetics. This is apologetics like you have never imagined. Apriorian Apologetics is the apologetics of perfection. It takes seriously every teaching, not excluding Matthew 5:48 and the associated verses of Matthew 18:18-20. Indeed, if one wanted to expand on Matt 21:42, one might understand this to mean the Bible, including that often excluded story given in Mark 10:17-27. The conventional view of apologetics is the justification of faith, using Scripture. The assumption is that if people understood what Scripture says, they would come to faith. But this defense of faith, as it is portrayed, is problematical. We are not just to defend. One does not win a defensive war. Which gives us or brings us to polemics. Polemics is a more aggressive defense and more akin to an attack as it seeks out issues and resolves them preemptively. However, these are poorly thought out responses to doubt. The problem is not doctrine, the problem is us. A person that does not trust Christians is not likely to be persuaded by their arguments. Apologetics and polemics is better suited to dealing with the issues Christians raise and disagreements between groups, than convincing atheists to abandon their antipathy towards the faith. Apriorian apologetics is the apologetics of an absolute worldview, not simply one expression of it. The Bible is of course vital to the faith, but it is hardly the coup de grace with a people who are far from God. The conflict is between an absolutist frame of reference and a contingent or relativist one. The Bible of course aids in this, but if we give the Bible a liberal twist, it will not be of much use. On top of that, or in addition, if our churches become nothing more than institutions of the established order, they will do more to excuse the relativistic position, than convince doubters of the validity of an absolutist frame of reference. The question is, how do we convince those in a relativistic reality that an absolute reality exists, never mind that it is far superior to the relativistic reality if we ourselves occupy a relativistic world and express its position? There are two worlds. There are not more than two but more than one. We have to establish that fact between we can justify faith. But few Christians understand the need for an absolutist position, never mind acknowledging that God does not reside in a reality that rejects him. There is no room for God in the materialist frame of reference. In this, atheists are right. There is no God and no way to legitimize God, in a materialist frame of reference. That might be the end of it, but relativity has to be relative to something. Without an absolute frame of reference, the relativist position is rendered incomprehensible. One group of philosophers spent years proving metaphysics was incoherent, but the only way their arguments could be made, was by means of metaphysics. However, in one sense, their arguments were right. Metaphysics made no sense in a materialistic universe. And since all God arguments are metaphysical, no argument for God would make sense in a materialistic universe. The only way a metaphysical argument can be understood, is in an absolute frame of reference. God exists is a simple proposition that has no meaning in physical reality. There is no way to give it meaning empirically. The logical positivists argued incessantly about the meaningless arguments that metaphysicians made, without ever looking at the claims of a realist. The fact their arguments against metaphysics were constructed on a metaphysical framework ought to have been instructive. It ought to have been deduced, that if realism precluded metaphysics but that if this was a metaphysical argument, then in fact, if metaphysics was required to demonstrate metaphysics and realism were incompatible, metaphysics had to be the more coherent position. But they did not wish to go this far. Yet, the work of the logical positivists proved the absolute could not be eliminated. The logical next step would have been to discern whether the idea of a physical reality could be done away with. But this step was not taken and not even addressed. The entire justification for the realist interpretation is the success of empiricism. But even here, empiricism is not the success realists suggest it is. Without mathematics, science does not produce much that is meaningful, and mathematics is more analytic. Indeed, the sciences are divided into the hard and soft disciplines, or the physical and the humanities. There is not much in the humanities that can be quantified, and so the soft sciences are soft on hard data. They rely more on the observational skills of the investigator than empirical data. The hard sciences attempt to focus on one variable that can be quantified. We can measure the length, speed, occurrences and other variables using quantitative measures. But numbers are not real. They are concepts and abstractions. In other words, empiricism is only successful when it can be interpreted in a logical way. All of this suggests that the world is not real, In a physical sense, there is no substance that is real. Reality is a concept. The realness of things depends on the coherency of the concept. If we define reality as the physical universe, we will be left with not only a lot of unanswered questions, but a number of paradoxes as well. For example, where did time come from when from is a time-dependent concept? The problems with a physical reality are innumerable. Not all of them will be gone into here. But it is already clear that physical reality is relativistic in its construction but must utilize the abstract absolute to talk about the contingent. There must be an absolute good, to make sense of the harm people do. We need something to compare the actual to. The law merely takes a rule out of thin air. It might say we are not to murder, but then it has to make exceptions for things like war and justifiable homicide. There are always exceptions to a law, and so the laws tend to multiply to take into account the nuances, and along with the law the bureaucracy that administers it, expands also. But even here we are faced with the issue of how we modify the law or decree some law is wrong, if we do not have a sense of what the law ought to be. The physical world is a world where only one thing matters, and that is power. There is no right or justice that is not predicated on power. Power is the operational component of natural law. Might makes right in the end justifies the means. If one lacks the power to do something, then one lacks the right to do it. But this reliance on the natural law of power is not a good situation to be in. For one thing, it forces us to fight or get left behind. We are told in Ephesians 6:12 against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. This is generally supposed to refer to the state or the elites and to what might be called the global world order. The verse could also refer to the powers of nature. The natural order of things, which does include a class of humans, but it also be remembered that in Genesis Adam is told that he will earn his bread by the sweat of his brow. Genesis 3:19 In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. We are also told. Genesis 1:26-28 And God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. We have dominion, but obviously, if we have to earn our bread by the sweat of our brow, it is a rulership more taken than given. It is not just the earth, but those whose power is established on the earth, through the ways established by the earth. But this reliance on raw power is only wrong in an absolute sense, which is only possible if there is an absolute right and wrong, which negates the rule of power. If power is not an ultimate good, then what is? Power is always relative unless it is divine. If power is absolute, then everything we do must be directed towards it. But this gives us an entire separate reality. There are two races and two realities, each governed by a difficult culture or worldview. Natural man is governed by the law of nature. Spiritual man is governed by absolutes. Spiritual man must wrestle with and combat nature. Not just nature but all that which flows from natural law, the law of the jungle, the law that says might makes right in the end justifies the means. Only when we overcome nature and with it, natural law and the system of fallen man that prioritizes the evidence of the senses, can we build the church and restore God to his rightful place as the creator of heaven and earth. This is the job and duty of apologetics. It is not about arguments and narrative proofs. Apologetics is about science. It is about hard, objective evidence with quantifiable methods of validation. Apriorian apologetics is a hard science that amalgamates all areas of inquiry even to the hardening of the soft sciences. Apriorian turns apologetics into a universal theory of everything and a mission to prove the existence of God scientifically. The world is an experiment. Logically, there is only one way to live. It can be tested empirically, because the right way to live is quantifiable. The right way to live builds a free market or / in the biblical church. The world, or reality, is not just divided into two competing worldviews, each worldview is part of an experiment. The realists form the control group. These are all persons that are not part of the test group. All they do is continue to live as they always have. They will invariably create costs, be forced to live under the law and be administered by a state. Then there is the test group. The operations of the test group are the true apologetics. We explain and defend the Gospels by defeating the world and building the church. We are a light to the world, and a sighted guide to the blind. The test group must defeat the control group. These are the principalities and powers that represent nature and natural law. Apologetics is the means and mechanism we use to defeat the world, which is the control group. In another sense, apologetics is the whole armor of God. It is a whole system that replaces the systems and mechanisms the control group uses. We cannot overcome the flesh and be perfected unless the control group and the test group are not separate. One cannot be defeated by the other, unless there is a line of demarcation between them. At the heart of apologetics is the free market that through its activities binds the buyer and seller together and builds the church. The development of the free market generates or manifests as Christian asceticism. This is the practice of self-denial, i.e., control of one's passions and base impulses, to overcome the flesh, to build the church. If we are consumers and hedonists, we will be consuming all we produce, or even more. Ultimately then, apologetics culminates in an ascetic community dedicated to devoting all of its resources to the task of building and expanding the church.